This week in Pure Reinvention.
But in a nonprofit, all too many times, the leaders are leading from the heart and not necessarily through the business lens, and not realizing that as the fiduciary of the corporation, it's their responsibility to ensure that the organization is sustainable.
Episode 120, Dr. Truman Hudson, Chief Imaginer, Dex Design, and on the faculty of many higher education campuses.
Engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this episode of Pure Reinvention, where we create space for the unexpected by inspiring a reinvention lifestyle. Jody, Dr. Hudson really opened some eyes.
Yeah, he hit the nail on the head so many times when I was listening to his podcast. I was just shaking my head and saying, yes.
Kind of like he's a part of the Pure Reinvention team,
I tell you what, when he said that connect was the step that he most closely identified with, It really resonated throughout his conversation. And you'll hear that. The leader's job, he talks a lot about what it means to lead and to own. And he pulls connection into that, connection to the marketplace, running your nonprofit like a business, and connection to your team as well and the abilities that they bring to the table. So it's a really full podcast. I think you're going to get a lot out of it, and I'm excited that he was able to speak with us.
Yeah, the students who get a chance to have this professor as a part of their curriculum are very lucky, and we were very lucky to score him on a podcast. Let's listen.
Have you enjoyed our Pure Reinvention podcast? Are you ready to begin your own Pure Reinvention journey? Join our next Starters Experience May 4 through 5 and May 24 through 25 in Detroit. Learn the 5 fundamentals in an engaging and interactive way. Contact us at purereinvention.com today.
So pleased today to have Dr. Truman Hudson Jr. from Dex Designs, whose title is Chief Imaginer. He is also on the faculty of some major universities. So we're very pleased, Dr. Hudson, to have you here today.
Thank you, Mr. Bills, for having me.
Of the 5 steps in the Pure Reinvention process, which step do you most closely associate yourself with?
I believe it's connect. Connect in the sense of, if you have read Herman Melville's work, the author of Moby Dick, he states that we're connected by thousands of invisible fibers, and our actions return to us as opposite reactions. So there's this thought of this human connections that we all have, and we can't survive on this planet without understanding who we are and how our actions impact other people.
Hard to get away from those old physics lessons, isn't it?
Yes.
What's your superpower?
My superpower, I believe, is vision. I can see things that other people can't. Oftentimes when I'm working with clients or even with students, I'm able to draw out that part of them that they oftentimes suppress.
And then, Dr. Hudson, there's always times when we find ourselves in uncomfortable situations. Can you describe a situation most recently where you found yourself in an uncomfortable situation?
The most recent is at this moment, being on air. Originally, I thought this was going to be something that was going to be videotaped, so I came prepared to look somewhat the part of being videoed.
Your Sunday best. You look great.
Thank you.
Well, our goal in having you as a podcast guest is to share with our listeners something that's very near and dear to our hearts that we were made aware of as a part of your work. And now we're going to move from the formal Dr. Hudson to Truman. Truman, you had come to us being credited with the impression that nonprofits were destined to have a certain life to them.
Yes.
And that struck me individually and us collectively, because our work at Pure Reinvention is to understand the importance of a limited life and to understand the importance of constant reinvention in order to maintain vitality and success. And here we found a man who was apparently singing some of the same praises.
Yes.
So would you tell our listeners a little of the background that helped you have this focus of why you believe the way you do?
In teaching, I recall when I was in undergrad, I had taken a fundraising class, and a gentleman who taught the class, Chuck Kleber, I said I wanted to be like Chuck. I saw this tall gentleman who was very versed on the nonprofit sector, and ironically, even though I raised $915 million in my lifetime, I got a C in fundraising. And what I learned in his class was that people give to people. People give to people they know, they care for, and they trust. And that people invest in nonprofits based on the people that are in the institutions. So then after reading the history of nonprofits and watching how funding shifts based on who's leading, who's in office, it says, okay, what's going on and why does missions change? So missions change not only based on social concerns, but also the people that are in a position of power to give. So if you're connecting with people, you want to make sure that your mission and your work connects to what they want to invest in. So while you're trying to stay current of the issues as it relates to the social concerns that you are attempting to work towards, to address, you also have to be cognizant that of the people that you're working with and for, the funders. And I think a good example of the concept of being able to go out of business, polio was eradicated. So do you continue to try and address polio, or do you move into another level, which is what the March of Dimes did? They moved from trying to address polio to addressing birth defects. So the nonprofit has to be in a position where it's nimble enough to either achieve the mission or realize that the mission can't be achieved. And once the mission is achieved, move to the next bigger mission or situate itself to pretty much go into an extinction.
So a couple of things that I want to dig a little deeper in. One is you're apparently advocating strongly in the important role of evolution in the business staying relevant.
Yes.
And then the second thing is whose role it is to help that organization evolve and stay relevant. Okay. And you've made a lot of suggestions about the role of the leadership.
Yes.
Can you walk us through, from your vantage point, the role that leadership has in this journey of relevancy for organizations in the nonprofit sector?
To walk you through it, I would use a local nonprofit as a kind of like a case study for this discussion. Sure. Locally, we have a nonprofit, Focus Hope. They were founded back on March 8th, 1968 to address the civil disturbance in Detroit. FocusHope.edu. And when Father Cunningham and Eleanor Josias founded the organization, they originally founded it to address the issues around racism, poverty, and injustice specific around food. But as time progressed from 1968 into 1971, and they commissioned a study through one of the local universities, there's a high prevalence for individuals in the inner city not to have access to high quality, affordable food versus individuals in the suburban communities who had high quality, affordable food, and it was readily available in all of their stores. So they created the first food program. They went out to Congress, lobbied for the program. But as time progressed, when they moved into the 1980s, they realized that it's beyond the food program. So the mission shifted and the work shifted to address training individuals. So that training moved into the Machinist Training Institute. And I asked Father, I said, so Father, but what about the mission? What about the mission? He said, right. Civil and human rights is serious business. And as a business, you need to be able to shift to make sure that you can make the impacts that are needed in order to realize the sustainability of the organization.
Is that at the time when you began to realize that there was a thing, a characteristic of sustainability here that was really integral to the success of a nonprofit entity, and that is that evolution or that shift or that understanding of the need?
Yes.
And not maintaining the old status quo?
Yes, because even with that program, it started out as a 6-month program. And then as time progressed, they changed it to a 12-month program. And then from a 12-month program, they started building partnerships and connecting with Lehigh University, Rensselaer University, University of Michigan, University of Detroit. And they created a master's and a baccalaureate program in engineering where they trained individuals to go into manufacturing engineering. So you're talking about an organization that started out servicing food and went from servicing food to training individuals to become machinists, and from this space of machining to becoming an engineer.
So we have examples of entities who have adjusted and maintained relevancy. And of course, we have examples of nonprofits who have not maintained relevance and have gone out of business. But, yes. But let's get back to the question of leadership. What is the role of leadership in making sure that those businesses maintain successful relevance?
The unfortunate part in the nonprofit sector, and we had a conversation earlier, individuals in the for-profit have been trained to believe that. But in a nonprofit, all too many times, the leaders are leading from the heart and not necessarily through the business lens, and not realizing that as the fiduciary of the corporation, it's their responsibility to ensure that the organization is sustainable.
Okay, now let's stop right there. I want you to say that again. It is the responsibility of leadership. It's a fiduciary responsibility of leadership to maintain sustainability in an organization.
Yes, it is, based on the law. They are the agents of the corporation. The nonprofit corporation is no different than a for-profit corporation.
So sometimes boards and leaders get into the mindset that it's my role to maintain the financial fiduciary responsibility. Your suggestion, it's something much greater than that.
When you look at sustainability, if you were to compare a nonprofit to a big corporation, it can't do its business if it's not sustainable. So what I attempt to teach the organizations that we work with, or even inside of the classroom, is that you need at least 1 year reserves in the bank in order to maintain the operations of the corporation. And sustainability puts you in a position where you are able to pivot if necessary, and you don't have to worry about whether or not resources are coming in. And going back to Focus Hope, they just had to lay off a great deal of people because under the new leadership, they've not taken on that ideology of the sustainability model per se.
So one of the characteristics that goes into this, Dr. Truman, is of course the acceptance, the ownership.
Yes.
That the role of leadership is to ensure sustainability.
Yes.
Not necessarily to maintain the traditional status quo of running the same train on the same tracks at the same time, day after day after day.
I would agree. And I think if nonprofits adopt the mentality that the tech companies adopt,
One more of innovation?
Yes. Innovation and discovery and being able to pivot and knowing that for those of you who may be familiar with DOS, disk operating system.
You have to be a certain age for that. You're giving away your age.
Shh, don't tell anybody. But when we look at the advent of technology and how technology was infused into our worlds, you and I were in the DOS age, and then things moved into a different operating system where there's this Microsoft, and then you have this Apple. They have their own platforms, but as each platform changes, they change the platform.
You and I never did not always have, as our professional career, a cell phone in our pocket.
No, we didn't.
And I guess the interesting question to ask is if all leaders, I think for-profit leaders are more motivated in this mission than not-for-profit leaders for different reasons. But if leaders are engaged to be more innovative, right, as a part of the sustainability, what characteristic do those leaders need to have in order to have that sustainable, innovative kind of gene and mindset that they can create that kind of a presence within the organization?
One of the key attributes in the nonprofit sector would be servant leadership, which was explored by Greenleaf years ago. And as a servant leader, you're looking at your team and you're building up your team. So the sustainability of the nonprofit doesn't rest with the person per se that's at the head, but it rests with the entire team. And the leader's job is to shepherd the team through the process. So I think that being one of the attributes, being a servant leader who invests and build up people, but also
so that's almost that team-based, building that team-based leadership model,
right? You see it in the tech industry.
Yes, absolutely.
Whether it's Google,
people working together in groups.
Yes, and then also continuously investing in their own education. The continued education of a leader is so important. No matter how far you are in your career, it's paramount that you invest in understanding the new technologies and also bringing in young people that can help you think out of the box and look at things differently.
How important is it for leaders in today's not-for-profit sector to really be well connected to their marketplace and understand the marketplace that they're functioning in today and as it's moving into the future?
Basics, market research. If you don't understand your market, you're doomed to fail in business. So the nonprofit has to adopt the principles that guide successful for-profit corporations if they're going to achieve the mission and move the needle to go into another space. When you look at the nonprofit has two missions: the mission of the organization and the financial health of the organization. And you can't do one without the other. So they need to marry the two.
And if your revenue line on your financials is remaining relatively static and flat, that would suggest that perhaps there's the need to go into the marketplace to understand how the marketplace may be changing as the organization needs to change with it.
The marketplace, as well as internally, whether or not you have the right people to do the work. Because if you're successful, you shouldn't have to look for the resources. The money will come.
So what you're saying to me, if I'm hearing you correctly, is if you've built the right team internally within your organization, if you've allowed that to happen as
Correct.
a leader, that group will force you as a leader to deal with the realities of the marketplace.
Yes. And the great thing about the current marketplace, it consists of multi-generations. And because there are multiple generations out there, the organization should be nimble enough to impact different segments of that market as it relates to their mission.
So if a leader is interested in ensuring the sustainability of their business in the current and evolving marketplace, they only need to look at their own team of people internally and ask the question, is my group of people diverse enough in their talents and backgrounds and experiences to be able to recognize and help drive the success of this business?
I wouldn't say only. I would say that's the start. The other part is looking at evidence-based practices and seeing other organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, and governmental entities, because there's some good models out there.
Absolutely.
From a global perspective that are doing great things. And if you can see what someone else is doing, then you can build on their successes and import those successes into your corporate model.
It appears that you're an advocate of not reinventing the wheel.
None whatsoever. You can reinvent the wheel by repackaging ideas to take those ideas to the next level.
Or apply them into your marketplace.
Yes.
Yes. There's a lot of good stuff out there if you're willing to go look for it.
Yes.
If you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it pure reinvention. Lessons, lessons, lessons. They're everywhere, Jody, and the professor is here to help us.
I know. I love that he brings this historical perspective to things. And one of the key points that really resonated with me was it's okay as a nonprofit to shift your mission. And in fact, in some cases, it's vital that you do shift your mission because your marketplace or your need has changed. And he gave the example of the March of Dimes. And I guess I hadn't realized that March of Dimes originally was put together to eradicate polio, because I think of it as birth defects, because that's just how I've always known it. So this idea of, it wasn't that they shifted completely away from their mission, but they broadened it so that they can remain relevant. So I loved that concept that not only is it okay to shift, but you have to stay connected to your marketplace and your vendors so that you know when to shift, versus having that funding source dry up and then you figure out you're not relevant anymore.
Or to continue to stay focused on mission in spite of the fact there is no funding source ever again, and you have somehow missed the entire train going by because of your focus on something that maybe became so narrow it became non-relevant. And so the rest of the world recognizes that and moves on. And I think from a business perspective, one of the most difficult things for a business to identify is when it's time to make those fundamental shifts, because it's so easy to stay in the pattern of what we've always been doing. Yet the very nature of what the mission is to be relevant to the needs of the market. So it's really interesting to wonder why people are so slow at adjusting.
Well, part of it, I mean, and Truman touched on this, and I appreciated it. You know, he hammered hard on the fact that as a leader, it is your responsibility to make sure that you are running this organization like a business. And part of the reason that you run it like a business and that you want to have some profits is so that you can put them in your reserves. But as we said at the beginning of the month, the idea of reserves is not to just sit and watch the bank account grow.
Right.
It's because you will need those reserves when it's time to pivot, because there will come a point where in the pivoting process, you don't have those next funders lined up. And your staff is trying to figure out, well, if our work isn't going to be this anymore, what is it going to be?
Right.
And meanwhile, we're still continuing to write those paychecks. So you're going to need to tap into those reserves when it's time to pivot, and that's why you need to have them. But I like that he went beyond just saying it's important to be able to shift a mission, and he went a little deeper into the how we do it.
Well, interestingly enough, and I would ask this of leaders who are listening to this, would you describe your business as being robust would you describe your business as being really long-term sustainable? Or would you describe your business as being on a very low or no growth mode, perhaps declining revenues or declining customer base? And Truman is trying to impress upon us that the role of a leader is to, and a board, is to make sure that your organization is viewed as being robust and has this long-term sustainable feel to it. Investors, people who are going to be your customers, people who are going to be your suppliers, people who are going to be participating, do not want to feel or sense that you're one step away from not being in business. They want to be a part of something that's very robust, that's very sustainable, that's got a long-term trajectory to it.
It's true of your staff as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's the talent and the resources and the skill set of your team that is going to allow you to deliver on these promises that your mission has laid out. And your team doesn't want to come in and give their best to you if they feel like there's a possibility that the doors are going to be closed tomorrow.
So everywhere we look, we have an opportunity to create that environment. And Dr. Hudson is absolutely impressing upon us the importance of that environment at the operational level, at the board level, so that when you go into the marketplace, there's a sense that I'm really a part of something special, something very unique, and something that's going to be in existence for a long period of time. Because otherwise, why would I want to participate with something that looks like it might not be around for very long?
That's right. So if you're ready to make a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it pure reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.